The first shot came without warning, and the Meridian's echo should have died in that instant. Captain Elena Voss felt the ship shudder as the blast grazed the outer hull, and for one heartbeat she thought this was how it would end. Alone, forgotten, at the edge of a dead asteroid field nobody back home would ever hear about. Then the shot passed, and the ship was still there, and she understood they had only been given a warning. "Report," she said, and her voice did not shake because it never did, not anymore. "7 contacts," said Ensign Priya Nair from the sensor station, her fingers already flying across the console. "No, wait, 9. They're decloaking around us. Captain, they were sitting right on top of us and we didn't see them." Elena had known this moment was coming for weeks. She had felt it in the silence of deep space, in the way the Meridian's echo had been drifting a little too close to contested territory for a little too long. She had chosen this path. She had chosen this exact patch of the hollow expanse, this exact vector, because someone needed to be seen out here, alone and unprotected, so that something else could be measured. "On screen," she said. The image resolved into 9 alien warships arranged in a loose net around the Meridian's echo, sleek and angular, their hulls the color of wet stone. At the center of the formation, larger than the rest, sat a command ship bristling with weapons batteries that had no business being aimed at a single unarmed survey vessel. "That's a Threshold Accord hunter-killer squadron," said First Officer Thomas Reyes, stepping up beside her. His voice was light, almost amused, but his eyes weren't. 9 ships for 1 relay ship. Somebody's not confident. Or somebody's very confident, Elena said. A channel opened before either of them said another word. The image that appeared was tall and gaunt, with skin like cracked slate and eyes set too far apart to read easily. Commander Threl Vashka wore his rank plates like a man who had never once doubted himself. "Human vessel," Vashka said in the flat, over-precise translation the Accord always used. "You are in violation of the Threshold Accord's declared border. You will power down and prepare to be boarded." "We're a survey ship," Elena said. "Unarmed, non-combatant. You're well within your rights to escort us out, Commander. There's no need for 9 warships to do it." Vashka's expression didn't change. "There have been rumors, Captain Voss. Stories that humanity hides ships in this sector that do not officially exist. I intend to prove those stories are lies, by removing the evidence." Priya's hands went still on the console. Tomas glanced at Elena, and for just a moment, something passed between them. Old history, old losses, a name neither of them said out loud in front of the crew. "You already know my name," Elena said quietly. "I looked into your record before I came here," Vashka said. "Captain of the Kestrel, destroyed 11 years ago, in this same region, with all hands lost. And yet here you are, alive, commanding another vessel, in almost the exact place your first ship died. That is either remarkable coincidence, Captain, or it is bait." Elena felt the old wound open, the one she carried quietly every day and never let anyone see fully. "The Kestrel wasn't destroyed by an accident, Commander. It was destroyed by a ship very much like yours, that fired on an unarmed vessel without warning, the same way you're about to." "History is not evidence," Vashka said. "Power down your engines." "No," Elena said. The silence after that word stretched long enough that Priya stopped breathing. "Captain," Tomas murmured. "Orders?" Elena's eyes stayed on the screen, on Vashka's flat, patient face, on the 9 warships closing their formation half a degree tighter. She thought of the Kestrel, of the names she still recited in the dark some nights, of every promise she had made to herself in the years since. This was the moment. This was exactly, precisely the moment she had built her whole life toward. "Send the signal," she said. "Full spread, all frequencies, coordinates and the code word. Now." Priya's hands moved before her mind fully caught up. "Sending, Captain, that's not a standard distress call, that's—" "I know what it is," Elena said. "Send it." The transmission went out in a burst too brief for the Accord's translators to fully parse. A string of coordinates that meant nothing on any accepted star chart, and a single human word, repeated 3 times. "Kestrel, Kestrel, Kestrel." On Vashka's bridge, his communications officer frowned at the incoming data. "Commander, the signal doesn't match any known distress protocol. It may be a targeting beacon. Then destroy the source before it can be used," Vashka said. "Weapons free." 9 warships opened fire at once. Elena grabbed the edge of her chair as the Meridian's echo rocked hard, alarms screaming across every console. Thomas swore under his breath and threw the ship into an evasive roll that should have bought them seconds, not survival. Priya was shouting damage reports that blurred together into noise. Elena watched the tactical display, watched 9 converging lines of fire close on the small, fragile shape of her ship, and for one terrible instant she thought she had made a mistake, that the signal hadn't worked, that this was simply where it ended. Then the weapons fire reached the Meridian's echo, and there was nothing there to hit. Not smoke, not debris, not the flash of a destroyed hull. The ship was simply gone, vanished between one instant and the next, as if the space it had occupied had quietly folded itself away and taken the Meridian's echo with it. On Vashka's bridge, the silence was absolute. "Report," Vashka said, and for the first time something uncertain moved behind his flat alien eyes. "Commander, there's no wreckage," said his tactical officer. "No debris field, no energy signature consistent with destruction. The target is simply not there." Vashka stared at the empty space where 9 warships' worth of firepower had converged on a single unarmed vessel, and found only the slow drift of undisturbed stars. "Scan the entire sector," he said. "Full spectrum. I want to know where that ship went, and I want to know in the next 10 minutes or I will have answers from someone's career instead." His crew worked in tense, hurried silence. Sensors swept space in every direction, hunting for a wake, a trail, any trace at all of a ship that had, by every law of physics the Accord understood, simply ceased to exist without dying. They found nothing. But far beyond the range of Vashka's sensors, in the true dark between the stars, something enormous had already begun to move, patient, silent, and now, finally, awake. Somewhere in the dark, a ship that no longer had a hull rating anyone could name was counting down to something Elena Voss had waited 11 years for. The Meridian's echo had not exploded. It had not been destroyed. As far as Elena could tell from the readout scrolling past her, it hadn't even moved. The stars outside the viewport were the same stars, the same terrible emptiness of the hollow expanse, except now the 9 warships that had opened fire on them were gone from the display entirely, and in their place was silence so complete it felt like held breath. "Systems?" she asked. "All green," Thomas said, sounding almost as unsettled as she felt. "Hull integrity, full. Power's steady. Whatever just happened to us, it didn't hurt the ship at all." He looked up at her. "Elena, what did we just do?" "We got someone's attention," she said. Priya was still staring at her console, her young face pale under the bridge lighting. "Captain, I don't understand what I'm looking at. According to every sensor we have, we're exactly where we were 30 seconds ago. But the Accord ships aren't reading us. It's like we're still here and we're not here, both at once." "That's about right," Elena said, and offered nothing more. She felt Thomas's eyes on her, patient, waiting the way he always waited, when he knew there was more she wasn't saying yet. He had earned the right to ask. He didn't, not yet, and she was grateful for that small mercy. Aboard Vashka's flagship, the mood was very different. "Nothing," said Sub-Commander Althara, closing the results of the 3rd full sensor sweep. "No wreckage, no drive trail, no gravimetric residue at all. Commander, whatever that ship did, it left no evidence it was ever destroyed, because I don't believe it was." Vashka's jaw tightened. He was a proud officer from a proud line, and pride did not sit well beside failure. "Ships do not vanish, Althara. There is an explanation, and I intend to find it before this reaches command." "There may already be an explanation," Althara said carefully. "There are old accounts, training texts most officers dismiss as superstition, that describe human ships operating this way. Vessels that answer certain signals by disappearing entirely from sensors, only to reappear somewhere else undamaged. The techs call them ghost escorts. I always assumed they were exaggerated stories meant to frighten new recruits. Then you assumed wrong to believe they had any truth to them at all, Vashka said. Humanity does not have technology to fold ships out of existence. If they did, this war would already be over. Perhaps, Elthera said, that is exactly why we've never seen it used before now. Vashka turned from her, unwilling to let that idea take root in front of his bridge crew. Resume the search pattern. Widen the sensor net by 2 full sectors. That ship is out there, Elthera, hiding behind some clever trick, and I will find it before I report anything to command that I cannot fully explain. Hours passed. The Accord fleet swept the hollow expanse in careful, overlapping arcs, finding nothing but empty rock and colder space. Vashka grew quieter with each failed pass, his pride curdling slowly into something harder and more dangerous. Aboard the Meridian's Echo, the crew had not been idle either. "We're moving," Priya reported, frowning at her instruments. "Captain, the navigation computer shows a course correction, but nobody input it. We're being steered." Elena felt her pulse quicken, though she kept her face perfectly still. "Steered by what?" "I don't know," Priya said. "It's not a hijack. The systems still respond to us. We could override it if we wanted to. It's more like something's guiding us, and it's letting us know it's there." Thomas leaned over the console, studying the corrected course. "Elena, this heading takes us deeper into the expanse, further from any supply line, further from any friendly territory we know of. If we're wrong about this, we're flying straight into whatever's waiting for us with no way home." "We're not wrong," Elena said, quiet and certain. Priya hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been building in her since the moment the signal went out. "Captain, what does Kestrel mean? You sent it like it was a name, like it mattered more than any code word should." Elena was quiet for a long moment. The bridge lights hummed. Outside, the stars slid slowly past as the ship followed a course no one aboard had chosen. "It was my first command," she said finally. 11 years ago. A survey ship, much like this one. We were ambushed the same way we were today. No warning, no chance to surrender, just weapons fire from ships that decided we weren't worth the courtesy of a warning. Her voice did not break, but it came close. "I lost every person under my command that day. I was the only one who made it to an escape pod in time." Priya's hand had gone still on the console. Tomas said nothing. He already knew this story, or most of it, and had never pushed for the rest. "Kestrel isn't just a code word," Elena said. "It's a promise, and today I finally found out if anyone kept it." Before either of them could ask what that meant, the comm system crackled to life on its own. Not a hail from any known frequency, not a signal either Elena or Priya had opened. On the bridge of Vashka's flagship, the same thing happened at the exact same moment. Every screen flickered together in perfect, impossible unison. Sensor displays, tactical readouts, navigation charts, all of it dissolved for half a second into static. And in that static, faint but unmistakable, a single transponder signal bled through. Old, decades old, by its encoding, human in origin, registered according to the fragment of data that survived the flicker, to a ship the Accord's own records listed as destroyed with all hands more than a decade ago. The Kestrel. Elthera stared at the impossible signal, feeling something cold settle low in her chest. "Commander, I see it," Vashka said, and for the first time his voice had lost its certainty. The screens flickered again, and this time a voice came through, not translated by any system aboard the ship, not decoded through any known language matrix, simply understood the way a held breath is understood before the first word is spoken. "You found one," the voice said. "Now you'll meet the rest." Every light on the bridge went dark at once, and in the sudden black, 9 Accord warships felt, for the first time in their long and confident history, what it meant to be watched by something they could not see. 11 years before Commander Vashka's lights went dark, A woman with tired eyes and a folder full of dead names had stood before a small, skeptical committee and told them humanity needed to learn how to disappear. Admiral Renata Kessler had not been an admiral yet then. She had been a survivor of the same early wars that had nearly ended humanity's short time among the stars, standing in a gray briefing room arguing for something no one wanted to fund. "We cannot win a war of numbers," she had told them. "We are too few, too spread out, too new to this. If we try to match every hostile fleet ship for ship, we will lose everything within a generation. But if we build something else, something patient, something that answers only when called, and only with exactly enough force to end the threat, we survive. Not by being the strongest, by being the ones who choose when to be seen." They had called it the Shadow Fleet Initiative. Ships built quietly, crewed by volunteers who understood they might spend years, even decades, in the dark without ever firing a shot. Its doctrine was simple and absolute. Never provoke, never escalate beyond what was necessary, and never, under any circumstance, let an unprovoked attack against an unarmed human vessel go unanswered. It had one more rule, the one Kessler cared about most. Every survivor of every ambush, every massacre humanity endured in its early years among hostile neighbors, was offered a place in the fleet if they wanted it. Grief, she believed, deserved somewhere useful to go. Elena Voss had taken that offer 11 years ago, in a hospital bed with burns still healing on her hands, 3 days after the Kestrel died around her. None of this history reached the bridge of the Meridian's echo as its comm systems flickered and stabilized, the strange voice fading as suddenly as it had come. Elena only knew with total certainty what it meant. "They're here," she said quietly. "Who's here?" Priya asked, still staring at the dead comm panel. "Captain, what was that?" "That wasn't Accord Tech, and it definitely wasn't ours. It's complicated," Elena said, which was not an answer, and they both knew it. Thomas caught her eye, and for the first time since the attack began, he allowed himself the smallest, tightest smile. "Kestrel," he said half to himself, "you've been waiting 11 years to say that word for a reason, and it's finally about to matter, isn't it?" "Yes," Elena said, "it is." Aboard the Accord flagship, Vashka's bridge came back to life piece by piece, systems rebooting in ragged, uneven bursts. His crew worked in tense silence, restoring one console at a time, while Vashka stood rigid at the center of it all, refusing to let anyone see how deeply the voice had unsettled him. "Status," he demanded. "Weapon systems are unresponsive, Commander," said his tactical officer, disbelief plain in her voice. "Not damaged, not offline in any way our diagnostics recognize. They simply will not answer commands. It's as if the systems themselves have decided not to fire." Elthara had been quiet since the voice faded, turning something over in her mind that she was reluctant to say aloud. Finally, she spoke. "Commander, I need to tell you something my grandmother told me when I was young enough that I thought it was only a story to frighten children into obedience." Vashka did not look at her. "This is not the time for old stories." "It might be exactly the time," Elthara said. "She served during the first contact wars, Commander. She told me about a human doctrine, a fleet that didn't exist officially, that answered a very specific signal by appearing exactly where it was needed, in exactly the strength required, and not one ship more. She called it the Silent Doctrine. She said humans built it not because they wanted to win wars, but because they had already lost too many of their own, to ambushes, just like the one you ordered today. You believe humanity built an invisible armada that only reveals itself when summoned," Vashka said flatly. "I believe," Elthara said, "that we have spent the last several hours failing to explain a ship's disappearance, a voice with no source, and a weapon system that refuses its own commander. I believe the evidence in front of us matters more than my pride, Commander, and I would ask that you consider whether yours matters less than the lives of everyone on this bridge." For a long moment Vashka said nothing, then his jaw set hard and final. "I will not retreat from a threat I cannot see because a story frightened you as a child, Sub-Commander. If humanity has hidden ships nearby, then we will force them into the open and we will destroy them there, where they cannot hide behind whatever trick disabled our weapons the first time. Commander. Full sensor sweep, maximum output, all frequencies, Vashka ordered, cutting her off. If there is a fleet out there, I want it found, and I want weapons control routed through manual override on every ship in the squadron. If the automated systems refuse to fire, we will fire them by hand. Elthara held his gaze a moment longer, then turned away, unwilling to argue further in front of the crew, though the unease on her face did not fade. Back aboard the Meridian's Echo, Elena finally told her crew the truth, or as much of it as she was permitted to share. 11 years ago, after the Kestrel, I was given a choice, she said. Join something new. Something that doesn't exist on any public roster, doesn't answer to any visible chain of command, and doesn't fight unless it's called. I said yes, because I couldn't stand the idea of another crew dying the way mine did, with no one coming for them. She looked at Priya, then at Thomas, weighing exactly how much more to say. This ship was never just a survey vessel. It was bait, and I knew that when I took the assignment. I needed to know, once and for all, if the promise I made was one that would actually be kept. Priya's voice was small. And is it? Before Elena could answer, the ship's sensors flared bright red, and every alarm on the bridge screamed at once. On the tactical display, Vashka's squadron had reoriented, all 9 ships turning as one, weapons batteries glowing hot with manual power, aimed directly at the empty patch of space where the Meridian's Echo still sat. Invisible but not, apparently, undetectable for long. Captain, Tomas said, urgency sharpening every word. They're powering up for a full spread. Manual targeting all ships. They're not waiting for confirmation this time. No, they're just going to fire into the dark and hope they hit something. Elena's eyes went to the long-range display, to the faint outline gathering at the very edge of sensor range, shapes that hadn't been there a moment ago, arranged with a precision that made her chest tighten with something close to relief, and something closer to fear. Let them fire, she said quietly. It won't matter anymore. On Vashka's bridge, his tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief as she stared at her own controls. Commander, the weapons, they just stopped again. All 9 ships, every battery simultaneously. It's not a malfunction, sir. It's like something reached out and simply closed our hand around the trigger. Vashka stared at his dead weapons console and for the first time in his long career, felt something colder than anger settle into his chest. Because far beyond his ship's sensor range, in the dark he had spent hours failing to search properly, shapes were finally beginning to decloak. Not one ship, not 2, but a slow, deliberate unveiling of a fleet arranged with mathematical precision around his own, close enough now that even his outdated instruments could no longer pretend they weren't there. 9 warships that had come to erase one human vessel from existence now found themselves surrounded by something that had not fired a single shot, and somehow that silence was more frightening than any weapon. Vashka watched the shapes resolve on his bridge display one by one, until he could count them properly. 6 vessels. Not the overwhelming armada his fear had briefly imagined, not the endless dark he'd pictured in the half-second before the lights returned, just 6 ships, arranged in a loose, unhurried formation around his squadron, close enough now that their hulls were visible even to the naked eye through the forward viewport. They did not look like warships. That was the strangest part. They were lean, quiet, almost unremarkable, painted a dull, matte gray that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Nothing about them suggested the kind of power that had disabled 9 ships' weapon systems twice without visible effort. Elthara, Vashka said, his voice tighter than he intended. Identify them. I can't, Commander, she said. Nothing in our database matches these hull configurations. They're not registered anywhere. As far as any record I can access is concerned, these ships don't exist. A new channel opened, unrequested, the same way the earlier voice had come, simply present without preamble. The image that resolved was a man in a plain uniform with no insignia Vashka recognized, standing on a bridge that looked almost aggressively ordinary, lit warm instead of the harsh tactical blue Vashka's own crew worked under. He had the kind of face that gave away very little, calm in a way that felt earned rather than performed. "Commander Vashka," the man said, "my name is Captain Marcus Ilian. I'd like to offer you something most people in your position never get. A clear choice made with full information before anything else happens here." Vashka straightened, refusing to let the strangeness of the last hours show on his face. "You've disabled my weapons twice, hidden a fleet inside my own patrol lane, and now you offer me choices. Forgive me if I don't feel especially free, Captain." "You still have a choice," Ilian said. "Withdraw your squadron from this sector, and every one of your people goes home tonight. Refuse, and we will finish what your weapons systems have already tried twice to prevent you from doing to yourself." His tone never rose, never sharpened. "I'd rather not need to prove that second part, but I will, if you make me." Elthara stepped closer to Vashka, her voice low. "Commander, this is the moment my grandmother's stories warned about. They never attack first. They only finish what's already been started. If we withdraw now, this ends without anyone dying." Vashka's pride, wounded twice already in front of his own bridge crew, would not allow him to simply retreat on the word of a stranger and an old superstition given weight by circumstance. He thought of his record, spotless until today, and of the report he would have to file if he turned back now with nothing to show for the encounter, but a story no one at command would believe. "There is one human vessel here," Vashka said. "One. If it dies, this fleet of yours loses whatever it was protecting, and this entire encounter becomes irrelevant. Target the survey ship directly. Ram it if the weapons refuse to fire again." "Commander," Elthara started. "Do it," Vashka snapped, and his helmsman, trained too well to disobey a direct order even against every instinct screaming otherwise, pushed the flagship into a hard burn straight toward the coordinates where the Meridian's Echo sat. Still faintly cloaked, but no longer entirely hidden. Aboard the Meridian's Echo, alarms screamed the moment the flagship's engines flared. "Captain, they're coming straight at us," Thomas said, hands already moving across the helm. "Full burn, collision course. He's not trying to fire anymore. He's trying to ram us." "Evasive," Elena said, calm even as her pulse hammered. "Priya, give Thomas everything you've got on their trajectory. We need every half second." Priya's fingers flew, feeding data faster than Elena had ever seen from her, fear sharpening into focus rather than panic. "Trajectory locked, Captain. If we bank hard to starboard on my mark, we clear the impact zone by less than 200 meters. "That's enough," Thomas said, jaw tight. "Mark it." The ship rolled hard, gravity compensators struggling to keep pace, and for one stretched, silent second, Elena watched Vashka's flagship scream past close enough that its running lights lit the bridge through the viewport. Close enough that a miscalculation of even a few meters would have ended everything. It missed. Barely. On the tactical display, the 6 gray ships moved at last, and Elena felt something in her chest loosen for the first time since the attack began. They didn't destroy Vashka's flagship. They didn't need to. Precise economical strikes lanced out from 3 of the vessels simultaneously, disabling engines and weapons systems across the Accord Squadron one ship at a time, methodical as a surgeon rather than a soldier, leaving hulls intact and crews alive, but utterly powerless. Within 90 seconds, all 9 Accord ships drifted dead in space, weapons dark, engines silent, completely at the mercy of a fleet that had chosen, deliberately, not to kill a single one of them. On his own crippled bridge, Vashka stared at the wreckage of his authority rather than his ship, breathing hard, humiliation curdling into something more dangerous than anger. Elena watched the display and allowed herself finally one small exhale of relief before Ilian's voice returned over the open channel, quieter now, meant only for her. "Elena," he said. And something in the way he said her name, familiar and worn soft by years, made her chest tighten in a way none of the day's battles had managed. "It's good to see you made it. You always did have a talent for walking straight into the fire and trusting the rest of us to catch you." "Marcus," she said, and for one unguarded moment her voice cracked around the old grief she never let anyone see. "I didn't know if you'd still be out here. I didn't know if any of it was real anymore." "It's real," Ilian said. "It was always real. We just needed you to be brave enough to call us." Before either of them could say more, Aelthara's voice cut through every open channel at once, frantic in a way that silenced the bridge instantly. "Captain Ilian, Elena Voss, whoever is listening," Aelthara said, her composure fractured for the first time. "You need to hear this now. This squadron was never the true threat. We were a scouting detachment sent ahead to report back before the main strike force arrived. That force has already been alerted to combat in this sector, and it is inbound, and it is not 9 ships." On the long-range display, new contacts began to bloom across Elena's screen. Dozens at first, then more, an armada far larger than anything the small Shadow Fleet detachment had shown so far, closing fast on a sector that had, until moments ago, seemed dangerous but survivable. Elena looked at the swelling wave of hostile contacts, then at the 6 quiet gray ships that had just disabled 9 warships without killing anyone, and felt the true size of the coming storm settle over the bridge like a held breath about to break. The armada that filled Elena's display within minutes was not 9 ships or 60, or even 100. It was a wall of hostile contacts stretching across the entire sector, more firepower than the tiny Shadow Fleet detachment could hope to survive by strength alone. "Captain," Priya said, voice tight, "I'm reading over 200 vessels, full battle configuration. They're not scouting, they're not investigating. That's an invasion posture." Elena's throat went dry. 6 ships had been more than enough to humble Vashka's squadron. 6 ships were nothing against 200. On the open channel, Aelthara's voice was still shaking with the weight of what she just reported. "That fleet was already en route before Commander Vashka engaged you. This was never meant to be a single hunt, Captain Voss. It was meant to be the beginning of a larger campaign, and your ship was only ever the excuse they were waiting for." Vashka, still stunned and powerless on his crippled bridge, said nothing. For the first time, his silence looked less like pride and more like fear. Elena turned to the comm display where Marcus Ilian still watched, calm in a way that seemed almost impossible given the numbers now bearing down on them. "Marcus, tell me you have more than 6 ships out there." "I have exactly what I need," Ilian said. "But not the way you're thinking." He didn't order a retreat. He didn't order an attack. Instead, to Elena's disbelief, he ordered his 6 ships to power down every offensive system they carried, weapons going dark across the small detachment, even as an armada of 200 hostile vessels closed the distance. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Elena said, sharper than she meant to. "Showing them something they've never been given a chance to see," Ilian said. "Prepare to broadcast on every frequency the incoming fleet can receive, full spectrum, no encryption. I want them to see this before they see anything else." What went out across every channel in the sector was not a threat and not a demand. It was a recording. Old, worn at the edges by the years it had traveled, time-stamped 11 years and 3 months in the past. Elena recognized it before the first frame even fully resolved and felt the floor drop out from under her. It was the Kestrel. The recording showed the ambush exactly as it had happened. The sudden weapons fire from an unmarked hostile vessel, the desperate scramble of a crew given no warning and no chance to surrender, the slow, terrible minutes as the ship died around them. It showed Elena, 11 years younger, dragging a wounded crewman toward an escape pod while the Kestrel's hull buckled around her. It showed exactly what an unprovoked attack against an unarmed human vessel looked like from the inside, without a single shot fired in retaliation, because there had been no weapons left to fire. "Marcus," Elena said, her voice raw, "why are you showing them this?" "Because every ambush your people have suffered has been erased from Accord records as propaganda," Ilian said quietly. "Because the fleet closing on us right now has been told for years that humanity is the aggressor in this region, and they have never once been shown what actually happens when that lie is tested against the truth. I would rather they see the Kestrel and choose to stop than force them to learn the same lesson Vashka's squadron just learned, at a cost none of us want to pay." On the incoming Armada's lead vessel, far beyond what Elena's own sensors could see, the recording played out across a bridge full of officers who had grown up believing humanity struck first and asked questions never. But there was one more thing the recording carried, buried in its final seconds, that Elena had not known was there until the audio kicked in. A voice, faint, distorted by the years and the damage the Kestrel had suffered, but unmistakably human, cut through the static in the recording's last moments, calling out coordinates and a name Elena had spent 11 years associating only with grief. "This is Petty Officer Daniel Cho, Escape Pod 3, requesting extraction. If anyone hears this, tell Elena Voss I kept my promise. Tell her I made it." Elena's hands went cold on the console. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Daniel died. He died in that pod. The search teams never found—" "They found him 3 days later," Ilian said gently. "Adrift, alive, barely, in a pod whose beacon had failed. We picked him up before the official search called off the effort. He's been with the Shadow Fleet ever since, Elena. He asked me not to tell you until you were ready to hear it, because he didn't think you'd forgive yourself for grieving someone who wasn't gone." The bridge of the Meridian's echo went utterly silent. Priya looked away, giving her captain what privacy the small space allowed. Thomas reached out, steadying a hand on the back of Elena's chair, saying nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. "Is he—" Elena's voice broke entirely. "Is he here? Now?" "He's aboard my ship," Ilian said. "And Elena, I promise you, this isn't the moment for that reunion. Not yet. Right now I need you steady, because what happens in the next few minutes will decide whether this ends in more graves or none at all." Elena forced her breathing to slow, forced 11 years of grief and sudden impossible hope back down into something she could function around, because Ilian was right, and there would be time later, if there was a later at all. On the incoming Armada's lead vessel, the recording finished playing to a bridge gone completely still. And then, unexpectedly, a second voice broke the Accord's official silence, not from command, not from any authorized channel, but from Thara, still transmitting from Vashka's crippled ship, her voice carrying a conviction that hadn't been there hours earlier. "This is Subcommander Thara, acting under emergency authority due to Commander Vashka's incapacitation," she said. And beside her, Vashka said nothing to contradict the claim, too shaken by what he'd just watched to argue. "I have witnessed this human fleet disable 9 armed warships without killing a single crew member, twice refuse escalation when they held total advantage, and now broadcast evidence of their own tragedy, rather than use force to end this. I am requesting that the incoming fleet stand down and open formal dialogue, before this becomes a war neither side can walk back from." For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. The 200 ships of the Accord Armada held their formation, weapons still hot, still capable of ending everything in an instant. Then, at the very edge of Elena's sensor range, something new appeared that made even Ilian's calm voice tighten for the first time since the encounter began. A single contact, larger than anything the small Shadow Fleet detachment had shown so far, decloaked at the furthest limit of what her instruments could detect, not attacking, not advancing, simply present, its true size still unclear even to her most sensitive readings, as if 6 ships had only ever been the very smallest, most careful fraction of what had been waiting in the dark this entire time. "Marcus," Elena said slowly, "what is that?" Ilian's expression, calm through every moment of the encounter so far, finally shifted into something Elena had never seen on his face before. "That," he said quietly, "is the reason the Kestrel's promise was ever kept at all. And it's about to answer a question every hostile fleet in this galaxy has been too afraid to ask for 11 years. The question every hostile fleet in the galaxy had been too afraid to ask for 11 years was a simple one, and Elena Voss finally heard the answer in the seconds before the largest ship she had ever seen fully decloaked at the edge of the battle. How many are there, really? The vessel that emerged from the dark was not a warship in the way Vashka's squadron understood the term. It carried no visible weapons batteries, no aggressive angles, nothing built to intimidate at a glance. It was simply vast, large enough that the 200 ships of the incoming Accord Armada suddenly looked small against it, large enough that every sensor reading Priya pulled came back with numbers that made her hands go still on the console. "Captain," she said quietly, "that's not a warship. According to what I'm reading, that's a carrier, a very, very large one." She looked up, pale. "Captain, I think that's where the rest of the Shadow Fleet actually lives." On the open channel, Ilyan's voice carried none of its earlier lightness. "That's the Coventry," he said. "She doesn't come out unless she has to. She's not meant to fight, Elena. She's meant to remind anyone watching that the 6 ships they've already seen were never the whole answer. Just the smallest one we thought would be enough." Aboard the incoming Armada's lead vessel, whatever debate had been happening among Accord Command in the silence after Aelthara's broadcast ended abruptly. No further weapons powered up. No further ships advanced. The entire 200-strong formation held perfectly still, watching a single carrier they had no framework to measure, no history to compare it to, and no confidence at all that engaging it would end the way their doctrine promised. Vashka, still standing on his crippled bridge, watched the same display with an expression that had finally, completely, lost its certainty. "Aelthara," he said quietly, "was I wrong?" It wasn't quite a question, and it wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to either that Elena had heard from him since the encounter began. "Yes, Commander," Aelthara said gently, without cruelty. "I believe you were." The lead ship of the Accord Armada opened a formal channel at last, addressed not to Vashka, not to Aelthara, but directly to Ilyan's small detachment and, Elena realized with a start, to her. "This is Fleet Marshal Dinar Osik," said the voice that came through, older and more measured than Vashka's had been. "We received the transmission, both of them, the recording and the request for dialogue. I am ordering my fleet to hold position and withdraw all weapons to stand by. I would like to speak with whoever commands this detachment, and with the captain the recording belonged to." Ilyan glanced at Elena through the comm feed, and for the first time since the battle began, allowed himself something close to a smile. "That's you, Elena. This part was always going to have to be you." Elena straightened in her chair, steadying 11 years of grief and hope and fear into something she could stand behind. "This is Captain Elena Voss," she said, "formerly of the Kestrel, currently of the Meridian's Echo. I don't want a war, Fleet Marshal. I never did. I sent a signal today because I needed to know if a promise made to me 11 years ago was still being kept. I got my answer. I'd like the chance to find out whether we can build something better than the one your commander Vashka tried to start." There was a long pause before Osik answered. "The recording your fleet broadcast does not match what my officers have been told about human conduct in this region," he said finally. "I would like to understand why that gap exists, Captain Voss, formally, and without further weapons fire on either side." "I'd like that too," Elena said, and meant it completely. It took another hour for the details to settle. A provisional ceasefire, an agreement for formal contact between Accord Command and human representatives. Vashka's squadron released from its disabled state and permitted to withdraw with Aelthara now formally acting as liaison for what would become, in the months ahead, the first real diplomatic channel between humanity and the Threshold Accord in over a decade. None of it happened quickly, and none of it happened without difficulty. But it happened without another shot fired, and for the first time in longer than Elena could remember, that felt like enough. It was only after the Armada began its slow, careful withdrawal, after Vashka's squadron limped away under Aelthara's temporary command, that Ilyan's voice returned to Elena's private channel, softer now, personal. "There's someone here who's been waiting a long time to talk to you," he said. Longer than he'll ever admit. The image on her screen shifted, and Elena found herself looking at a face she had spent 11 years certain she would never see again. Older, weathered by years she hadn't been there for, but unmistakably, impossibly familiar. "Hey, Captain," Daniel Cho said, and his voice cracked exactly the way Elena's did in return. "Told you I'd keep the promise." Elena didn't trust herself to speak for a long moment. Tomas quietly stepped back from the console, giving her what space the small bridge allowed, and even Priya, wiping her own eyes without quite hiding it, turned her attention back to her instruments to let the moment breathe. "I thought you died in that pod," Elena finally managed. "I said your name at the memorial, Daniel. I said all your names." "I know," Daniel said gently. "I heard eventually. It took a long time to be steady enough to reach out, and longer still to be sure you'd want to hear from someone who let you grieve him for years he didn't need to be grieved. I'm sorry for that part. I'm not sorry I made it." "Neither am I," Elena said, and for the first time in 11 years said it without the old weight crushing the words on the way out. There would be more conversations after this one. Quieter, private, unhurried. The kind that took years of loss and slowly turned them into something survivable, instead of something carried alone. There would be formal reports to file, and difficult questions from command about a classified fleet that had just revealed far more of itself than doctrine strictly allowed. There would be new recruits, new ships, new names added to a promise that had already proven once that it could be kept. Priya asked to be considered for the Shadow Fleet's next intake, before the Meridian's Echo had even finished its slow journey home. And Elena, watching the same fierce, focused determination in the younger woman's eyes that she remembered feeling herself 11 years ago, told her she'd already put the recommendation through. Thomas simply stayed where he always stayed, beside her, steady, the way he had been since long before either of them understood exactly what they were building toward. And when the Meridian's Echo finally cleared the edge of the hollow expanse, drifting back toward more familiar space, the 6 gray ships of Ilian's detachment escorted them for exactly as long as it took to be sure they were safe, before fading, one by one, back into the dark where they belonged, visible only long enough to be remembered, never long enough to be found by anyone who hadn't earned the right to see them. Elena stood at the viewport and watched the last of them vanish, feeling for the first time in 11 years something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite fear, but sat somewhere warmer and steadier between the two. "Kestrel," she said quietly, to no one but herself and the stars. This time the name didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a promise finally, fully kept, and like the quiet, certain knowledge that humanity had never truly been hunted at all. It had simply been listening, all along, for exactly the right moment to answer.